The following podcast is a Super Network production with your hosts, Super Marcey.
Yeah, definitely a step up, but, that could be perhaps maybe this script just worked. Maybe it was just the fact that it had Eric Roberts being all Eric Roberts-y.
The terrible Australian Bede Jermyn.
Why doesn't the vampire just leave? It's not like that he's being held there against his will. And we've seen him a few times on top of built-on roofs. Like, why doesn't he just piss off and leave?
It contains coarse and explicit language.
The housemate dude, I was like, why the f*** are you dressed like Constantine? That was just weird out the whole time.
Mature themes.
It's your wedding day and everyone always has cold feet and they this is kind of more of the extreme version of that kind of scenario. Like, should I marry a serial killer or not?
And potential spoilers.
Spoiler alert.
For more, please visit supermarcey.com and show your support at patreon.com/thesupernetwork. Enjoy the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Podcasters of Horror, the podcast where we look at TV shows and films that are horror anthologies. We've covered the Showtime series Masters of Horror, and we are currently going through Fear Itself, which only lasted one season. I am your host, Super Marcey, and welcome to episode 18, where we will be continuing our discussion on Fear Itself episodes, with episodes 9 and 10, Something with Bite and Chance. I'm joined by my regular co-host, the terrible Australian Bede Jermyn. Hello, Bede, and how are you today?
I'm good, thanks, Marcey. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. Just coasting along as we do in this part of the world.
Indeed. And we're sort of like almost at the tail end of our journey with Fear Itself, because we got these two episodes, and I believe that the next episode that we record will be the final 3 episodes of the show. So it's been quite a journey, at least for me, revisiting the series, but for you, going through the series for the first time.
Yeah, it has been, and because it only went one season, not as many episodes on Fear Itself than there were Masters of Horror, because that was 2 seasons, obviously. Mm-hmm. And watching this for the first time has been interesting. There's been some high and low points, but I'm very excited to talk about these 2 episodes. And we are joined by one of our regular Podcasters of Horror guests. He is the killer horror critic. He also might be from outer space. Please welcome back to the show, Matt Konopka. Hello, how are you?
Hey, good to be back. So tell me, on a scale from 1 to 10, how excited are you to be done with Fear Itself, since I imagine there are more low points than high points?
Actually, it hasn't really been too bad, kind of revisiting. I think we've had more middle ground than, say, full-on great or full-on bad.
Yeah, there was the odd kind of really bad episode, but then it's kind of been more middle ground. But the ones we're talking about today, I was actually very surprised by. And as we mentioned last week, they only aired... how many episodes did they air again?
13. 13 episodes.
Yeah, but how many actually made it to TV?
Oh, well, only the first 8. And what's interesting, because the first 2 the 2 we're gonna be talking about tonight are the first 5 that didn't air at all in the US, and they didn't get released until when the series was released on DVD, like a year afterwards.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. These are the unaired in the US episodes now. And it's a shame, because with the last 2 that aired, they were okay-ish. But then you get to these ones and they're like, wow, this is like a lot better. So it's a bit of a shame, actually.
Yeah, definitely. And it's kind of interesting that, we've sort of talked about, because I do remember, at least in the tail end of this series, that that's when the episodes kind of started to get a lot more sort of interesting and more stronger as well. So we'll definitely have a lot to talk about, over the next, this episode and the next one is when we talk about this series.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of funny that Matt is with us for this one, because the first episode we'll be talking about actually involves the very thing that he loves the most in this.
Werewolves!
Yeah. I was going to say, I'm pretty sure you wish your wife was a werewolf. That's how much you love him.
I might pull what happens at the end of this episode. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. It's totally you. You could have been the lead in this movie.
Exactly.
I
This movie.
the lead or another character, which I guess we'll talk about when we're spoiling things.
Yes.
See, the first episode should have been titled "Something with Bite: The Matt Konopka Story."
Yes.
Exactly.
It should have been. Yes. Episode 9, the Matt Konopka episode. Something with Bite.
Listen, I have to ask you a question. Something serious.
Oh, yeah?
When you're a wolf, do you, I mean, I know it feels good, but I don't remember everything. And I think I might...
I've been here, man. And I've been there. Let me give you it. And this comes from over 30 years' experience with this monster. You don't do anything as a wolf you wouldn't do as a man. Now take that as you will. But if you're a good man, then you're a good dog.
But the animal attacks...
No buts. You're not responsible for these killings.
How can you be so... What are you saying? Are you responsible?
Heavens, no. We're vegans.
Then who is?
There are others of us out there. Some of us are less well-behaved.
I know Mick personally, no big deal.
Yeah. I've lost my train of thought. Yes. So Something with Bite was directed by Ernest R. Dickerson, who's known for films such as Juice and Bones, as well as many TV directing credits. It was written by Max Landis, who we all previously discussed on Masters of Horror with Dear Woman. Yep, thumbs down. It stars Wendell Pierce, Paula Jai Parker, Kaylin C., Jillian Barber, Fulvio Cesar, I don't know, I'm sorry, and George Boozer. The plot from IMDb: Wilbur is a veterinarian who begins to turn into a werewolf after being bitten by a large animal brought to his clinic. Now, I think our resident werewolf guy needs to tell us about this one first.
Indeed.
Okay. So well, first off, I mean, it's a fun episode, you know, and this is what I love about Ernest Dickerson, is that all of his work has that really great comedic vibe to it, but he achieves the number one thing that you always have to, I think, with werewolf films, is that you want a good werewolf first and foremost. And Dickerson is one of those directors who actually believes very strongly in having practical effects in just about everything that he does. So, like, you know, if you ever go back and watch Bones, I mean, that was a movie made in the early 2000s, back at a time where, you know, most directors or studios would have said, fuck no, we're not doing any of this practical shit that you want to do. We're just going to throw in, you know, CGI. And Dickerson ended up making a huge deal about it with, you know, having the whole, like, Wall of Souls thing and everything. And anyway, I'm getting off track. So I really appreciate the humor of it. It touches on kind of your classic sort of werewolf story, you know, so it's not really anything too new there. Guy gets bitten by a werewolf, starts becoming a werewolf, unlocks inner desires, you know, that whole kind of thing. But then what's interesting is, I don't know how far we can get into spoilers at this point.
All spoilers.
Okay. But then what's interesting is, you know, you get to the twist in the end and you find out that it's been some guy who wants to be a werewolf committing the murders. And I find that to be such a fun idea. It's not done as well as I think it could be. I actually think that a similar film, The Wolf of Snow Hollow, did something like that a little bit better. But it's just such a fun concept because, you know, we always talk about everyone's desire to be like vampires and, you know, be like sexy and, you know, live forever and all that kind of stuff. But you never really see that tackled too much in the werewolf genre. In the werewolf genre, it's generally a curse. And, you know, those receiving it don't really want it to begin with. So to have this character that's doing these killings in the hopes that he's going to become that, I just think that's kind of fun to touch on. especially for freaks like me that, love werewolves and want to be ones. I don't know. I mean, I could keep ranting, but
Oh, Bede, do you want to? Well, since this was a rewatch for you, how did you feel rewatching this one?
It's interesting to me because having rewatched this episode, like, I think the first time I watched it, like, my initial thoughts on it was like, oh, it's an okay episode. Nothing amazing, but an okay episode. Rewatching it again, I do like it a lot more this time around, and I think one of the main reasons why that is what Matt has already stated, is that, sort of compared to other werewolf projects we've seen before, like when somebody has been cursed as a werewolf, it's either the character's kind of this tortured soul who doesn't want to become a werewolf, or it's somebody who sort of embraces being a werewolf, but for a really dark, sinister purpose and wanting to, basically just kill and eat everyone. But I think what makes something with Bite interesting, though, is that it's probably one of the few, probably the only one that I can think of, where you become a werewolf and it actually affects your life in a very positive way. So, and that there's a lot more sort of, more benefits of actually being a werewolf. And one of the interesting aspects is you think, oh, if you're going to be a werewolf, you're automatically going to be killing everyone. But as like a married couple who Wilbur, like earlier in the piece, Wilbur, like there's a strange animal comes into Wilbur's veterinary place, and at first they're not sure exactly what type of animal it is because it's just got run over. But of course he gets bitten, and then from there he becomes starting to develop the symptoms of being a werewolf. And then of course this married couple comes in claiming they're looking for, well, the animal, which is named Michael. But then you find out that Michael is actually their son. Then you find out later on, as Wilbur goes to see them, that they too are actually werewolves as well. And Wilbur sort of asks, like, how do you live your life as a werewolf? So maybe you're going around killing everyone. And they pretty much explain, no, you don't have to kill people, because if you live your life as a good person, when you become a werewolf, like none of those kind of killing urges will happen to you unless, you live your life as a good person. However, they do state that there are those out there who do give into those urges and, kill anyone. So I think that's an interesting thing, like where this isn't something where literally the werewolf curse doesn't force you to become a killing machine. Like you can choose to how you behave as a werewolf. And I think it's really interesting in that regard. And of course, when you find out that all the killings that are happening in the movie are not done by a werewolf, but somebody pretending to be a werewolf because they too themselves want to be one, is actually a pretty solid twist. Like, I do agree with Matt that it probably could have been handled a little bit better for me. And for me, it kind of just comes out of nowhere. There's no real sort of build up to that twist. Like, if that character was, say, earlier in the movie or something like that, then maybe it would make more sense that the episode goes in that direction. But I do like the fact that even, that guy pretty much ends up being Wilbur's first kill. But even before then, whenever Wilbur becomes like a werewolf, like he's not doing it to kill people. He's just sort of giving into his animal urges. Like, his sex life with his wife is getting better. And also before, like, he was a bit of a neglectful dad, but even then his relationship with his son gets better. And, he's sort of like real, and he finds more passion in his work as a veterinarian as well. So it's very interesting to kind of see how something like becoming a werewolf is not a bad thing. Like, it can actually benefit somebody if you choose to let it be a good thing.
Right. It's treated like a gift, which is kind of why you get the finale that you sort of do with this, because the guy who's trying to, attract werewolves to him so that he can be bitten, he ultimately didn't earn the gift. So I kind of look at it that way, where it's like, the werewolf curse or whatever you want to call it can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, So like if you consider the fact that it is this thing that sort of, maybe unlocks parts of yourselves that you aren't consciously willing to explore, if you look at it in that sense, it can be a gift or a curse depending on how you sort of treat it, right? So I do kind of like this sort of tackles that, because it's not like we've been saying, it's not usually discussed in these movies. It's always it's bad, everyone's going to, want you dead, and and it only ends one way with, whoever loves you putting a bullet in your head or something. So it's a unique way to approach it, at least at the time it was.
And it does a good job, but like until you sort of find out like what the twist is, like it actually does a good job sort of making you wonder, is like, is Wilbur actually the one going around killing these people? At least like we all know, like it's the serial killer who's doing all the killing, but for at least the first half, like when we find out, because the episode pretty much starts with us learning that there are these animal killings going around, but we assume that it's the Michael the werewolf that, who gets run over. We assume that's it. And then, of course, there's no killings for a week until once Wilbur starts to transform. We assume, oh, he's the one doing all the killings, especially because, one of his, his workers who basically, like, never comes to work at all gets murdered. And then, of course, one of his secretary gets attacked as well. Like, you kind of think, oh, is Wilbur the one actually doing it? But then, because again, I like with a lot of werewolf like projects we've seen before, like sometimes even the person who is a werewolf is not aware that they're a werewolf, especially when they're transformed, because they like wake up the next morning and like, oh, what happened to me the night before? I don't remember anything. It's because you were a werewolf and started going around killing people. But this one sort of treats that differently, and how it handles that aspect is really interesting. And it also does subvert a lot of the werewolf tropes that we all know of.
Well, and something that's interesting too, that ties into the reveal in the finale, is that, something that always happens in werewolf movies is you almost always have that detective who's like, who believes it's probably some kind of man, like no animal could do that. It's some kind of man going out there and, acting like an animal or whatever. Like there's always that character who's claiming something like that. And of course, it never turns out to be true. It always is actually a werewolf or some kind of monster. And so it's kind of funny that in this, you do have the detective who, every time he meets up with Wilbur, is kind of hinting at how he believes it's a man behind the killing. And the audience, like, it does a good enough job subverting expectations that the audience is thinking that they're ahead of the detective, and like, oh, you're so wrong, you stupid detective, it's a werewolf, idiot. Like you're so far ahead of him, you think, and then once you get to the end, you find out, oh no, he was actually good at his job. He was right all along. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually quite different because that does happen. I know I haven't said much about this one, but my thoughts, I really, really liked it because, as you've both said, it is quite different in certain ways, especially with how the reveal is in the third act. It is quite different from other werewolf stories or movies we've seen. So I really liked that aspect, and I thought like Wendell Pierce was a really great choice for the lead. I thought he was wonderful. He did such a great job. And what I also thought was interesting, like you do have a kind of middle-aged character whose life is kind of a bit shitty. And I feel like what this was trying to, I guess, be a metaphor with the werewolf thing, I feel like it was like a midlife crisis, although I think it's more like coming out of the midlife crisis in a more positive way. That's kind of my takeaway from it in that regard. But
I feel like it too, but it's like really, it's a little complicated though, I think. So I don't mean to interrupt, so interrupt me if but speaking on that, like something that I thought, so you two listen to my show, I like to read really far into things sometimes and probably be way off. So something I was kind of picking up on this, and like I don't think this is necessarily the answer, but I like the sort of questions it poses, is that, I do think you're right. I do think that the werewolf is a metaphor for a midlife crisis in this. Why I say I think it's a little more complicated than that is I think it's about what the crisis is. So I think when I'm watching this, you've got these early scenes with Wilbur, and he's just completely disinterested in his wife, like he could not care any less. And it's not about him not loving her. He has no interest in fooling around with her and sex, whatever, right? And she's trying as hard as she possibly can, to the point where she was putting her own ass in front of her child. So, so she's pretty desperate for Wilbur to just like fucking touch her for once, right? And he's still putting it off and off. And when he finally does get bitten and, you know, indulge in those urges, I guess, to actually sleep with her, he does it, as far as we can tell, as the werewolf, because he doesn't remember actually doing it. You know, to which I have to wonder, like, did she fuck the werewolf? Or, you know, did she not notice he was a little hairier than usual? I don't know. But what I'm kind of getting at is, so if you think about it that way, he needed the werewolf to be able to be attracted to his wife, you know? And so when I start kind of looking at other things, you know, you've got Wilbur, like, you know, he this is where I may be going too far, but he's reading like the Men's Health magazine with like some hot shirtless dude on the front, right? And Wilbur doesn't really strike me as a character who could really care about his health. He doesn't seem to be too concerned about that, and it's not really ever mentioned in the movie, right? And then the first character to die is his employee, this dude that he seems to have, if not an affection for, he's at least kind of letting him get off easy, right? Because this guy clearly never shows up to work, and he's kind of taking easy on him. And he ends up being the first character that's killed. And granted, it's not actually by Wilbur, but if you look at it the way that the film's presenting it at that point, you assume that it's Wilbur killing him. So, you know, to me, it's kind of like he's sort of kind of giving in to different urges there, where maybe he has an urge that sort of, you know, leads towards men, and he's kind of like figuring it out, so to speak, right? I don't know if any of that makes sense, but it's just the fact that he has to be the werewolf when he sleeps with him.
There could be something in there in that too. An exploration of one's sexuality later in life.
Right, exactly. Like maybe he's having this crisis midlife where he's like, I don't think I am, but maybe. You know?
It's like the experimentation-ish.
Right.
But I don't know if perhaps we're giving too much credit to the script.
I know that I am, because I don't think that was going through Max Landis' head whatsoever. No. So.
Perhaps it was how kind of it was interpreted. We'll go with that.
Yeah. No. I much more feel that this film, like, even though I enjoy it, there are little bits with just kind of how the female characters are treated, where it's like, I can see Max a little bit in this writing. And Wilbur not being attracted to his wife, that probably has nothing to do with what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's kind of...
That's a little more just his view on women in general.
Yeah, which is not great. Which, you know, that aside, obviously. You know, I was going to say, like, at least, you know, the werewolf looks pretty cool, and especially for kind of the budget they were working in, I think they pulled that off pretty well, which was really good. But yeah, I just actually found this one of the more enjoyable episodes that we've seen with Fear Itself. It was fun. It had some like funny moments. Like it had this quirk and charm to it that I think actually really, really worked. You know, with Wilbur kind of now being in tune with the animals was such a funny scene. Like, oh, this dog's swollen 2 batteries or something. And it's really good. And there's definitely some very weird vibes between him and the girl that worked there. I can't remember the character's name. And I don't know if that kind of feeds into what you were saying either.
Yeah. Well,
if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, well, so that could probably tie into a little bit of what I was saying, and just the fact that he's experimenting in all sorts of ways, right? You know, and maybe he's just kind of exploring a lot of these different attractions. But that in particular is like one of those things that stands out to me, though, that kind of rubs me the wrong way. You know, it's just like, you know, just thinking about who wrote it. I know I got to get beyond that, but it's like, you know, when he's hitting on her in the office, and he's just, you know, and Wendell Pierce is just such a good job of kind of, yeah, you know, like just really like sexiness, right? And it's like that whole thing is just like, oh, I don't like this.
it's really creepy, and at the same time, it's like, is he flirting with her? Is he not flirting? I don't know.
Confident? I don't know.
Yeah, am I reading this scene wrong? It was very weird, but...
I kind of just interpreted it as him, since this is like before he finds out that he's a werewolf, this is like that werewolf side kind of slowly kind of taking over. So he probably doesn't even know aware that he's, well, I mean, he probably is aware he's doing it, but probably like not sure where all this is actually coming from. Yeah.
Yeah, he feels good. He, like, for the first time in probably a long time, he's like, I'm not actually that bad looking, or like whatever it is that's going through his head, like he feels good for the first time in a while. So.
And then he sort of gets, once he sort of knows what he is, and it's like, okay, I can get this under control. Like I can still be confident, feel good, but I know how to control those impulses so they don't get out of control. And just and focus on my wife instead.
I mean, that's the other really interesting thing too, right? Is that he's got to be one of the few characters I've ever seen in anything that is turned into a werewolf, and I don't think he has a single moment of freaking out of like, oh my god, what does this mean for me? He just automatically accepts it and is like, this is great. Like there's no struggle with it. It's just immediately, I feel amazing. There's nothing wrong with this, and yay for me.
That's why Something with Bite is the Matt Konopka story.
Indeed.
Yes.
You're right with like the tone of it, and I think that's what's so great about what Dickerson brings to the film, because he does really have that understanding of how to do these sort of, more classic kind of monster stories, kind of like he did with Bones. Like Bones is sort of like, your typical gothic vampire story, but with a whole new twist and perspective, right? And that's kind of similar here in that he's taking kind of this old-fashioned tale that we've seen 1,000 times, and knowing that and knowing our expectations, he's adding a humor to it and that quirkiness that I think just ultimately works really well. And Pierce himself, I mean, I was fucking dying watching him even just transform into the werewolf. Because that's the thing is it seems like he and everybody else know, they just know exactly what kind of movie they're making. They're not trying to make it anything more or less than that.
Well, it's kind of like, at least out of all the episodes we've sort of, you and I have talked about on this, on the series when it comes to Fear Itself, this is definitely the first episode that definitely goes for that more horror comedy vibe rather than doing something that's very serious, which I think also does help with the film story, because it's, and obviously with Ernest Dickerson and their cast and all that, they kind of know exactly what type of story this is, because this is played for more laughs than sort of actual scares.
Right. Well, and it works well for a show like this that doesn't exactly have a stunning budget. I feel like it always works a little bit better to do these kind of more quirky, kind of fun horror stories, because the audience forgives you a lot more for where you mess up.
Yeah.
So like even though we love the werewolf and we think it's great, I'm sure there are a lot of general audiences that are like, that's kind of dumb, but because you're having such a good time, they forgive you for that, because it's all about the fun. It's not meant to be scary, so the werewolf doesn't have to look great. The characters don't have to be 100% believable. We just need to have a good time, and it does that beautifully. So
yeah, I think this one actually does that really, really well. So yeah, we'll go with our ratings for this episode out of 5. Matt, what is your rating out of 5 for Something with Bite, the Matt Konopka story?
Okay, so I'm probably going to give it like a 3 or a 3.5 out of 5. But the reason I'll say is because I didn't really get to this, is just that despite how fun it is, there are a lot of things that once you get to the end, you're like, wait, what? Like the fact that I totally get the twist with the werewolf wanting to bring a werewolf to him, but the massive amount of coincidence that goes into not only this werewolf ending up on Wilbur's desk, but then the 2 people that this guy just happens to target work for Wilbur, so like that's a little head scratching. But outside of plot holes and stuff like that, I mean, it's a fun short. Really great effects. I love Dickerson's direction and Pierce's act and performance. So, yeah. So I'd probably give it like a 3.5.
Okay, Bede, what about for you?
I'd probably give it 3.5 as well. I do agree with Matt in terms of the flaws of the episode. I think if this was a longer episode, like a Masters of Horror episode where it's like an hour long rather than 40 minutes, I feel like some of those aspects of the plot could have been explored more. But I feel like, regardless, though, it's still a really fun episode. And Wendell Pierce is great in the episode. He really goes at this role with a lot of gusto, and you can tell that he's clearly having fun with this character. And, you know, it has a lot of really funny moments. The supporting cast are all good. And, you know, it's just a fun little subversive tale on that, you know, looks at the werewolf tropes, but kind of spins them around and to give us something that's actually really fresh and unique.
Yeah, I give this 3.5. Jesus, I had something funny in my mind, but I don't. I'm giving it 3.5, like both of you. 3.5. Did the wife actually have sex with him in werewolf form? Out of 5. There we go.
I wanted to ask you two, what do we think here? Did she fuck the werewolf? She fucked the werewolf, right?
She fucked the werewolf.
I mean, it possibly did happen because, as if we've seen Bram Stoker's Dracula, we know that Sadie Frost clearly had sex with Dracula in his werewolf form, so it's definitely possible here.
Listen, he's having his midlife crisis. She's having hers, where she's finding out she's a little into furries. You know?
Yeah, exactly. You know, bit of a furry prediction with that one, maybe. But yeah, to agree with both of you pretty much on this episode. I think we all pretty much had the same feelings on it. And yeah, for those who are listening in and maybe haven't seen this episode from Fear Itself, this is actually one of the ones we'd recommend you watch.
Indeed.
And we'll move on to our second episode that we are discussing, episode 10, which is Chance.
What, are you gonna bash my head in now, too? No. No, that was an accident. He fell. Really? God. Because that doesn't look like an accident. Looks like the son of a bitch finally got what he deserved. Nicely done. You want to smoke? No. Got a little bit of a mess here. Want some help? No, I don't want your help. Suit yourself. Hey, where are you going?
Or Chance, depending on however you want to pronounce these things. This one was directed by John Dahl, who we actually discussed recently on the Super Podcast because he directed Rounders, and you can check out our audio commentary for that, which I think was really good. It was written by Len Dobbs and Rick Dahl. It stars Ethan Embry, Fondi Curtis Hall, and Christine Chatelain. And the plot from IMDb: Chance Miller is a down-on-his-luck guy whose luck goes even worse when he finds himself dealing with his evil doppelganger. And that should reveal why I said Ethan Embry's name just twice, because he basically plays two different versions of Chance Miller in this one. So we'll go in reverse order, and I'll start this time. So Marcey, what did you think of Chance? Well, Marcey, I think Chance might actually have been my favorite episode that I've seen for Fear Itself. Oh, really, Marcey? Why would that be? Well, Marcey, I like the doppelganger thing. It's very interesting. Probably fresh in my mind because I have been rewatching Twin Peaks: The Return, and that has a lot of doppelganger stuff in it. But also, Ethan Embry is just amazing. He might be one of our most cherished and wonderful actors, and it's great to see him playing like sort of this two different versions of the one character. Yes, Marcey, I agree. But I can't carry on with that. But yes, no, actually, I really liked that this kind of had the one location, mainly focusing with the one character, someone who's obviously desperate, in very desperate needs. And in a weird way, it was kind of like a little bit of the Dark Half vibes with this as well, looking at these different, I guess, versions of yourself in a way. But actually, I think this was the one I out of the episodes we've seen of Fear Itself that I liked the most. because I just felt it really worked. I think it flowed. The pacing was really good. Ethan Embry again was fantastic, and it's just a very simple story. And this could have easily have been a Masters of Horror episode. You could have easily make this kind of story into a feature film. So I actually really liked it. Bede.
Yeah, I really like this episode as well. Like, I think, again, like something with Bite, when I first watched this episode, I thought, oh, it's okay, nothing great. But I do appreciate it a lot more this time around, because it is actually a pretty well done and solid psychological horror thriller. Because what I think is really good, though, is like basically with Ethan Embry's character, he goes, sees this pawn dealer, played by Vondi Curtis Hall, basically tries to sell this little vase, and of course, things kind of escalate from there. And a mirror, prior to like things kind of getting out of control, he looks at this mirror and he notices like it's shaking really bad. And then after, when the mirror shatters, that's when his doppelganger sort of arrives. And what I think is great about this episode is that you're never 100% sure whether the evil version of Chance is actually there or if it's all in his head. And it keeps doing that even right after when the episode's finished, because this is one that kind of ends on such an ambiguous note that you're never really sure if everything that we saw, at least with the second Chance, is actually real, or if it's just all in his head. And maybe kind of, if it's in his head, was it all caused because of like this kind of situation that he's in, kind of spiraling out of control, and it affects him psychologically. And also there's a moment where he also bangs his head as well. So maybe that might have added to it. And yeah, I also like that this episode kind of reminds me in a lot of ways a little, at least on a little bit, not fully, but a little bit, like a Coen Brothers film where like basically it escalates, things go wrong, and it just keeps going wrong, more and more wrong after that for Chance. Because it's kind of set in this one place, which is this pawn shop. When you think like, oh, things are gone wrong, Chance tries to fix up, and then something else happens that completely goes wrong. Like, a cop comes along because the smoke alarm went off, and once he was talking to Chance, like Chance couldn't give him the code to say thinks everything is okay. So the cop comes along and sees, something suspicious. And of course, Vondi Curtis Hall's wife comes along as well to the pawn shops.
It kind of reminds me of an episode of Mad TV. I saw a skit once there where someone accidentally kills their neighbor, and then like the postman shows up and he has to kill the postman, and then like the next door neighbor shows up, he has to kill them, and then the milkman shows up, he has to kill the milkman, and then Girl Scouts cookies shows up, he has to kill her. I completely agree with the Coen Brothers analogy. It does feel a lot like that type of, sort of crime thriller just keeps escalating and escalating and escalating. Because nothing
Yeah,
goes
exactly.
wrong.
And I think it's both the script by Lem Dobbs and Rick Dahl. And, between the two of these writers, they've got pretty good, strong pedigree. Like Lem Dobbs, like, co-wrote, Dark City, The Score, and The Limey, and also Gotti, but we cannot hold that against him. And also Rick Dahl himself also co-wrote Red Rock West with his brother Nick Dahl, which also happens to star my favorite actor, Nicolas Cage. But, that's a whole different story there. But so between their script and also like John Dahl's direction, and John Dahl's, other than Rounders, he's directed so many other films as well, like The Last Seduction, Red Rock West, as I mentioned before, but probably, at least in terms of horror, and the reason why he would have been picked to direct an episode for this show was, of course, the film Joyride, which he directed. So he knows how to,
good.
Yeah, and he knows how to handle tension, and there's a good build-up throughout this whole episode, and also Ethan Embry's performance as both Chances is great, and like he really gives distinct like personalities for the both of them. Like his, I'll say first Chance. He's basically like slowly unraveling as the story progresses, but second Chance is much more confident and is more sadistic in what he does. But like I said, you're just never really sure. Like, are there actually two versions there, or if it's just the one that like the first Chance is just projecting, and maybe this other version is like another part of his psyche that's kind of manifested itself in front of Chance to kind of do all these deeds. But yeah, I mean, it's a really strong episode, and there's definitely a lot of interesting elements about it that I think make it much more interesting than a standard episode of the show.
And Matt, chime in with more of your thoughts, please.
Yeah, so as a I'll be honest, as a doppelganger story goes, I find it fine. Like I think when you compare it to others that are out there, such as like the Dark Half, or even, I don't know if you like would quite consider this a doppelganger story, but even Malignant, which is recent. These are like really fun, over the top kind of approaches to it, and this is pretty basic. It's pretty simple, like you were saying. It's a very simple story. So it doesn't exactly wow me there, but it is really well executed. It's well made, and the performances are great. And I do agree that even though the actual premise is kind of just okay, it does have something really interesting about it, which is what Bede was talking about, in the sense that, you don't really know for sure, is this in his head or not? And I think that's something that's not always kind of fully approached. Plus, we generally get an answer to that, and in this we don't. We're kind of left hanging. My personal belief is that it is in his head, because we open with that sort of dream sequence where he's like, I don't know, shaving and cuts himself or whatever. But we open with that, and the very first image is the fade from red onto the picture, which kind of makes me think that, like they say that when you have a fade to white, it's typically a dream. So I sort of replace the fade to red as that, in that this is just like a dream. It's setting us up for a psychological horror story where it's probably is all in his mind. But what I like about that approach with this is that, you do have this isolated story, and I think that ends up working really well for a guy facing, or a plot about a guy facing his own doppelganger and kind of having to confront sort of the darker subconscious of himself, because the isolated setting, kind of makes it feel like this whole thing ultimately kind of feels like he's in his own head, right? Like the pawn shop itself could kind of be like a representation of his mind, and he is just kind of going through all these various, urges and confrontations within himself, and all of those mistakes that keep happening. That's him running into conflict after conflict in his own mind, and kind of like, maybe sort of pushing himself to what he either is capable of or wants to be capable of, because he kind of sees himself as such a coward that it's almost like he's trying to convince himself, like he's basically bullying himself the way that everyone else has into being someone that's meaner, right? like the very first line from the antique dealers, something along the lines of like, it must be so tough to be a nice guy. And so I think that's ultimately a really interesting approach, because you're spending the whole time with First Chance, kind of in a way sort of convincing himself to not be a nice guy anymore. And that's kind of killing him in the process, because he's realizing like all the dark past and the sinister stuff that leads him to. So
Yeah.
I don't know if I ultimately I do really like it. I just found the premise to be a little blah, but I think it kind of works for the themes that it uses. So
Yeah, you could always look at it like that kind of sliding doors thing, because you do see like he remembers the deal just going through as he expected as well, and none of that happened, but then all of it happened. So maybe both of them happened in two different, the timeline split in half, and that's what happened.
Well, that's interesting too. Is maybe there actually are two winners, and we're kind of crossing paths between them. Right? In two different
I think
timelines.
what makes it interesting is you can interpret it in a lot of different ways as well.
Right, and that's its
But I was just really impressed. I thought this was really, really, really good. Even though the story, it is pretty basic kind of stuff. I think everything around actually really elevates it.
Yeah, it works. Oh, well, I was going to say, no, you're right. It works. Like you have, because they get everything right around it. Like especially the emotion. Like I don't know about you two, but when you have the security guard character who shows up, we as the audience, we automatically know that guy's gonna die, right? He's not making it to the next reel, but but he his performance, just this, side actor is like so genuine and so kind of like, and he's so excited, when Chance offers him to like come by the shop later, and he'll give like his wife a discount because she's a big fan of this stuff, and that's all happening, and then you get the moment where the security guard realizes that he's killed someone, and it's just like such a gut punch because you're like, man, I even like this security guard that's been so for 1 minute, and you almost kind of feel Chance's pain that he has to once again do something he doesn't want to do, right? So it's very effective in everything that it's doing.
No, it really is. And I think it's actually really well like edited and directed in those terms too. And it does have a really good kind of claustrophobic feel in a way that it's in the one setting and you feel his own kind of claustrophobia in this situation. So yeah.
Also, sure. And the whole office too, like if you pay attention to the background, it's full of these paintings of faces and people that are just watching all of this happen. So that just adds to the sort of claustrophobic nature of it. It's like Chance himself, if you look at it in psychological terms, is sort of putting himself under a microscope, and it's kind of like all of these paintings, they're like all of the eyes and whatever that he constantly feels on himself, right? And like he feels all this pressure from people of like needing to be someone else.
Yeah, definitely.
So it works really well.
I think so. I'm like, I was actually really impressed. I'm like, thanks, Fear Itself. You've actually given me a good one. And it's just, again, a shame this did not air on TV. And once again, if you've not seen this episode, go watch this episode. It's very much worth your 42 minutes.
Yeah, the more we're talking about it, the more I
think there you go. Did anyone have any last things to add on the episode of Chance?
Why are doppelgangers always smokers? It was just a note that I made. Like every fucking time I see a doppelganger in a film, they are a smoker.
Yeah, there's smoking in it, and it's funny because one of the passwords he tries to give, he goes, "A cigarette."
Right. Well, it's like everything is always like, oh, look how bad that person is. They're smoking a cigarette.
Of course, he's the evil doppelganger because he's smoking.
Oh shit! Does that mean I'm the evil doppelganger?
Yes, Marcey, you are.
That's how you know you're evil.
I always knew it. I knew it all along.
Damn it! I was the evil one. With that said, we'll give our ratings for this episode. My rating is 4 out of 5 Marcey good doppelgangers. And see this episode. Bede.
I give it a solid 4 as well. Like I would say put this alongside Family Man as the two strongest episodes we've discussed for this show so far. But this is a pretty solid one. I think this is the one that, for me personally, because we always talk about like whether an episode of Fear Itself could be expanded to be a Masters of Horror episode or even made into a feature film, like if they wanted to do that. I think Chance is fine the way it is as a 40-minute episode because I feel like it kind of does a good job at doing like sort of telling its story and its characters in a well-worth span of 40 minutes. Unlike something like we talked about on the previous episode, Community seemed like a feature film idea kind of shortened down to 40 minutes. So, but yeah, well, I think overall, like Chance is definitely a really strong episode of the show.
And Matt, what are you giving it out of 5?
Yeah, I'd give it, I guess, 4 out of 5 last chance as well. Because no, like you're saying, it's, again, I'm not overly impressed by the premise of it, but that's such a nothing criticism when it comes to this because the whole thing is executed so well that you can't help but enjoy it and appreciate it for what it is. So to me, I think that I may not love the premise. Everything else is so well done that it deserves a 4 out of 5 for me. And I agree with you. I think it works perfectly as a 40-minute short. Because it is so deep into Chance's head that I think once you kind of start to stretch that out too much, this isolationist one location story that maybe it kind of overcrowds or clutters it or, pushes it too far. So I think it works just well as it is.
Fair. Fair. And that is a wrap on this episode of Podcasters of Horror with Something with Bite, the Matt Konopka story, and Chance. How many damn chances can you have, buddy? Actually, 2 quite good episodes from Fear Itself, which I'm not sure if we've covered any Fear Itself where both episodes were actually really, really impressive, I think.
Yeah, it's always kind of one or the other. It's like kind of a decent episode to either average or not so good episode.
What's fun about it, too, is they actually go really well
They do.
together.
It was actually really good to just watch these 2 together.
Yeah, like they're not the same, but they have so many similar themes, dealing with, werewolves and doppelgangers, which both essentially kind of represent the same stuff, which is your inner desires and urges, right? So
yeah,
so really
actually paired really well. So yeah, if you haven't seen these episodes, definitely check them out. If you have access to, I think it's on Plex. US Plex. I don't know if it's streaming anywhere else.
And it's also on Vudu, which has way too many goddamn ads.
Yeah, so basically you can watch it on Vudu or Plex and deal with ads. So, yeah.
Vudu, I swear to God, like, look, if you're going to put in an ad, put it at the end of a scene, okay? Vudu likes to put it right in the middle of the scene.
I was happy because I watched it on Plex, and for the first time ever, and this was something even bizarre for Plex, they actually put the ads when the ad break parts came in.
They did that twice. And I'm like, wait, whoa. It was like fading to black and then ad. I'm like, oh, they actually got it right this time.
Oh, good. Not Vudu.
But, geez. And you can always catch Podcasters of Horror on all your major podcast streaming platforms like iTunes, Spotify, Good Pods, all the podcast platforms. Just look up Podcasters of Horror or Bede Marcey, or you can check the show notes. It's all there, and you can check out the Super Network at supermarcey.com. You can subscribe to our Patreon and get early access and all sorts of cool exclusives at patreon.com/supernetwork. The Super Network is on all your main social medias. We have a Facebook page, Facebook group, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Just look up the Super Network. You will find them. And you can find me personally at twitter.com/supermarcey. And of course, you can find me on Letterboxd under super_Marcey. Not under, but I'm at super_Marcey. That makes more sense.
Yes.
Bede, where can people find you?
If people want to find me personally, they can find me at my Twitter page at twitter.com/Jermyn or my Letterboxd page at letterboxd.com/Jermyn. And also you can find all my work over at supermarcey.com with all my reviews and columns.
Excellent. And Matt, where can people find you on the webs?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Killer Critic. So you can also find all my writing and reviews at killerhorrorcritic.com. I do a podcast with my wife called Killer Horror Critic, which I wish it wasn't named that, but that's what we do. And we basically just get drunk and analyze horror films to the best of our ability, even when they're birdemic, as Bede and I were talking about before this. We still try to find meaning of it to our own demise. And you can also not follow my doppelganger because they're too cool for you. So.
Well, apparently, at least at the time of this recorded this episode, I did have an evil doppelganger on Instagram. Yes, I did.
You did, actually, yes.
Indeed.
Cigarettes and all.
But I put that evil doppelganger in his or her place, whoever it was. Or maybe it was a bot. I'm not sure. It's someone.
Or are you the doppelganger?
Oh, no.
He might be. This could be evil Bede. See, he's got a mustache and everything now.
Yes.
Well, yeah, exactly. He looks
if Star Trek has taught us anything, if there's evil versions of ourselves, they either have mustaches or goatees.
Go down a little bit more so you can twirl it, and we'll know.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute.
Oh.
Go
He's
away.
definitely evil.
Uh-oh. I better go now. See ya. Bye.
Can't help it now.
And with that, we will bid you all farewell. Look after your evil doppelgangers, because you want them to do good stuff, not bad stuff. Stuff that benefits you, not them, whatever. And we'll catch you on the flip side on the next episode of Podcasters of Horror. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
See you, everybody. Bye.